Ladies and gentlemen, hello, welcome back to another lab video. We have another line from the Pearly Gates QA live stream. 1,000,001 people wanted to know everything about Arlino, how I designed super unfair stat blocks, as you can already see in the bottom of the screen here. We're going to get into it in just a sec. These are my notes as ripped from the Manor fight, the two-part section of like session 98, 99, somewhere in that zone. This is everything I have. We covered this bit in the live stream Q&A. If you haven't seen that already, please go check it out. It's about 3 hours and 20 minutes. It's pretty long, but we cover everything, every question you guys had, with the exception of Monacos from last week and the encounters that we're going to talk about today. This whole blurb right here is the notes that I handed to Troy when he came in to play Lord Ridgemont, and we had Claudio show up. So we needed the Arlecchino, obviously had two different, very distinct personalities. Claudio when he was serving Lord Ridgemont, and Arlecchino when he was serving his own needs. So, yeah, we already covered all of this there. I'm not going to go through it again. Because the focus of this is how I built this super unfair encounter that I do not recommend you ever use against your players, ever. This was designed to survive combat for at least 2 or 3 rounds with like 70 combatants. So for anybody wondering why this was so unfair, I needed Arlecchino to be a threat by himself, and the only way to do that is to effectively cheat. So we'll talk a little bit about how this came to be, why he was so difficult to kill, and how everything happened. The logistics of that have all been listed up here, so feel free to pause that, read through kind of everything that Arlecchino was all about, and then go watch the live stream if you haven't for how he got entangled with Kaya and how he met the Lunarch, how he got out of the box. We covered all that in the live stream Q&A. But let's get right into it. I've dabbled long enough in this sort of preamble section. So here's Arlecchino's stat block. Again, I cannot recommend that you use this in your fight at all. He was not fun to pilot as a DM because he was so broken. It was awful. I forgot a lot of these abilities in the moment, or I think a lot more of the Tots would have been destroyed. His armor class, for as long as Kaya was alive, was 23. So for anybody wondering why the Tots just could not hit this guy, 23 armor class. Obviously the hit points are just kind of me memeing on the demon that was showing up to kill them. His strength and constitution were bad because if they had saving throw abilities, I wanted to make sure there were at least a few, holes in the armor that you could actually hit, because if you did mental saves, obviously, nothing's going to happen. You're not getting in. That's part of the shadow plate deal that he signed. He had a 50-foot teleport, which is why he was just bamfing all around the manor, shutting down everything they could do. His condition immunities: charmed, frightened, stunned, grappled, restrained, paralyzed, burned, frozen, and poisoned. You were not going to kill this guy with damage over time. You were not going to slow him down. You're not going to be gaining advantage really in any way. There's no way for you to slow him down before he has killed most of you. The damage resistances were also pretty brutal. It was pretty much everything the Tots could do, he was either immune or resistant to. I did leave some vulnerabilities, but only a few attacks across all 70 of the Tots could even do these damages, and most of them were their weaker attacks. It was like Iris had Shadow Ball did like a D10. Not a lot. And even Howl and Growl barely can do dark damage. So this fight was meant to be extremely unfair, and the players were going to have to be very clever about how they did it. And Phoebe throwing a barrel of pure darkness, also known as just a normal barrel that's been sealed, was on the right track, very much so, but I was hoping that they would remember from their first encounter with Arlecchino, anything that you use against him will work. If you mime attacks against him, they will be more effective than what you can normally do. So this was meant to challenge the players, not their characters, and it worked really well, because they all forgot that. And he was immune to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing, so you're not going to be able to hit him with guns or knives or anything like that. He's immune to Claremont. He's immune to most of the stuff Wadsworth was doing. It was all pretty rough. He had 5 legendary resistances per day, which honestly is just kind of gross, but having seen some of the monsters that have come out since, and what we'll get into with the Lunarch, this was barely anything. He's got multi-attack, so he can do this. So this is the thing that was just kind of bleeding everybody all around him for some damage, because if you need your big bad to do some stuff, I'm not a proponent of doing this thing ever, but Arlecchino I needed to make a point with. And it was that what is coming is worse than this. So be aware, be warned. If you see the Lunarch, it is too late. Arlecchino was a harbinger of the bad ending for the Tots game. So that is why he is so busted. He's got 120 feet of true sight and a passive perception of 26. You're not getting sneak attacks. You're not doing anything to this guy that he's not aware of. But he would do the Spectral Presence, so you gotta make a DC 16 Wisdom save or suffer 2d6 dark damage, which was also meant to kill unconscious things around him. That was a big thing for Arlecchino. And it only happened to Klaus, but it could have been much, much worse, and we'll talk about what that box was doing later. And then he would make 2 extrasensory attacks. If the attack crits, rolls max damage, or rolls doubles, you roll an additional die of damage. So that's 3d10 psychic damage off the cuff. Most of the Tots at that time hadn't been tuned up, so 3d10 psychic damage, potentially 4, would have been lethal damage on a lot of the Tots if it rolled at all well. So I think the average HP at the time was about 40. So 1 or 2 hits of this, if you're close by or within 30 feet, which isn't even that close, that's pretty much the entire battlefield. 1 round of combat, Arlecchino could feasibly have just started knocking things out. So let's talk about his psionic abilities. Again, I cannot recommend that you use this encounter. I cannot stress that enough. Don't do this to your players. You can see the pain in my face while I'm doing this. It wasn't fun. But psionic abilities. These were legendary actions that he could take, which we'll cover down here. That's the thing. So, first one was Id Insinuation, which I think I took from 4th edition. It's just a cool name. But a creature within 30 feet of you must make a DC 16 Wisdom save or suffer 1d12 psychic damage and become incapacitated. As an action on your turn, you can repeat the saving throw. If you're successful, the effect ends and they end their turn prone on the ground. So this was pretty much just a save or be deleted from the encounter for a while, which would have also been really bad for everything down below. The Psionic Blast, I don't think ever did, because he wanted everything nearby. So it was a DC 20 intelligence save in a 30-foot cone in front of him, or take a little bit of psychic damage and be thrown 30 feet. Mind Thrust was pretty much guaranteed to hit. His attack bonus was 2 or 3 higher than the average AC on the Tots team. 3d6 psychic damage. You can only dash or disengage on your next turn, so it just shuts down if somebody was doing something he didn't like. He would just hit you. Ego Whip, a creature must make a DC 20 intelligence save, which I don't think was possible for anybody but like D and maybe Phoebe. This is just not going to happen without a crit. Or have disadvantage on everything you do for a minute. No further saves. So another one that just kind of shuts you down. Psychic Crush, DC 16 intelligence save, or 12d6 psychic damage to be stunned until you succeed that saving throw at the end of your turn. That was also pretty much a kill shot. I was going to save that one until, things were getting really dire. He was just going to start deleting Pokemon. It was going to be rough. Eldritch Lance is the one we saw the most often. A 15 by 120 foot line, DC 16 dex save, or 40-10 force damage. This is why he had the throwback knock prone abilities, which, is pretty rough. Because the idea would be knock him prone. You then can't succeed. Eldritch Lance hits you for full. So this is the thing that scarred all of the Tots more so than just the trauma of the encounter. So those were the psionic abilities. He wasn't meant to be able to do those on his turn, but because I left it under actions when I was running in the heat of the moment, things kind of got a little crazy. Plus, legendary actions are a little rough. This is one of the first times I ran an encounter with legendary actions and reactions, so things got a little squirrely, but it's fine. So he could use a legendary action to use a psionic ability from up above. He could use a legendary action to teleport 300 feet in any direction. And these were my notes. These were my notes for how Arlecchino would act. He wanted the longest, most drawn out, and most arduous pain and suffering for every Tot. His single target attacks will always hit the weakest non-combatants in range, i.e. if the Tots hadn't built a train and tunnel system to get Neek and Arjan out of the picture, and, you know, if Ruby and Pendleton and Ona, he was just going to start killing them. Otherwise, it was going to be AoEs to hit as many things as possible. He is immune to the effects of anything you conjure in the manner. However, if you mime actions out, it will work. It worked for Phoebe's in the past, and it was exemplified by Licky Tongue's untimely death. But his goal was to leave Phoebe and CJ for last, and you can probably figure out why. Phoebe, for anybody that hasn't watched the live stream, obviously, Lord Ridgemont really wanted her to take over. And as such, given that Arlecchino was also Claudio and working for Lord Ridgemont, he pretty much would have been completely destroyed and eliminated if he had harmed Phoebe substantially. So Phoebe was going to survive pretty much no matter what, and CJ was going to be tortured for all eternity, which, there you go. But if Arlecchino fails to defeat the children, Spectral Hands will grab and claw and drag him out of the manor as his past victims pull him to his final resting place. So either way, win, lose, or draw, if Arlecchino fails to beat the kids, he's dead forever. He's gone. If he succeeds in his goal, he would get to survive. He would maintain his immortality. But he traded his immortality to be able to do all of this. He basically said, I don't care about anything anymore other than destroying these children who ruined all of my plans. So that's Arlecchino's abilities in combat. Again, not fun to pilot, not fun for the players to fight, I have to imagine. They seemed pretty miserable at the time. Obviously, they still pulled through because I can't make an encounter impossible and not give them a way to beat it. And as such, we dive down to Kaya. So here's Kaya, a much more reasonable stat block. Obviously, the mental saves are still very good. They were always very good. She's got a reasonable AC of 16 and 100 hit points. She's not immune to anything. She's vulnerable to the same stuff that you would expect her to be, given that she's a ghost. So she had dark and ghost vulnerabilities. She was immune to the same conditions as Arlecchino because she's a ghost. You can't stun, grapple, or restrain, or paralyze a ghost. There's no body to burn, freeze, or poison, any of that stuff. She's got damage resistances to a lot of stuff, but no immunities. So everything that Arlecchino had, she was just resistant to, not immune. Same basic deals here. She had true sight, so if anybody was invisible, no, you're not. She had one legendary resistance a day, which I don't even know if it came up. If it did, I definitely forgot she could do it. She had Shadow Ball, 2d8 ghost damage. She wasn't meant to be a problem. She was just meant to show up later and be a solution for Arlecchino. So all she was going to do was summon little ghastly minions every turn that just absorb actions from the Tots. So summon undead, summon 2 ghastlies, they do Shadow Ball. It probably misses, but if it hits you, it's a little bit of chip damage. But it was going to just be enough, hopefully, to push a couple into unconscious so that Arlecchino could do what he was going to do with the box and get as many things as possible. Because if you were unconscious near the box, you got pulled in, which is pretty rough. Here's Jin and Rai, because they were, part of the deal here. Let me make sure you guys can see all that. There we go. So Jin and Rai, also just a mild problem to solve. AC 13, HP 50. I didn't put their resistances or anything here because they're just psychic types. If you kill them, they'll die. They had Psybeam and Shadow Ball. Super easy. Kaya is here to kill Milo and kidnap CJ because he had the greatest gift known to man and he gave it up to someone who would hide in a mansion. If he was so keen to be rid of the tombstone, you could have just given it to me. And Milo saw through your plans. That was kind of a little line she was going to deliver. I don't even remember if I did that. But if Kaya falls, Arlecchino takes 200 dark damage, his AC becomes 16, and he loses his immunities and resistances. He loses his condition immunities and a legendary action every round. And then Kaya would drop the memory thread and hand over Kaya's document. So all of that stuff happened. So there's a reason when Kaya died, they took out Arlecchino in like 2 or 3 rounds. Did not take long. If Howl crits or KOs Kaya, he will become a fully realized Fire Guardian. Kaya will try to seek out Milo and CJ, disregarding everyone else. I don't even know if that happened. I may have forgotten that. Jin, Ryan, Ghastly's conjured will attack the nearest hostile creatures. That was just easier for me to track than most other things. Now, you may notice there's a name hiding down here. This was just in case. So the Grave Tender. Let's talk about the Grave Tender. He's an absolute unit, obviously. He's got an AC of 20, 2,000 hit points, just mega stat block for everything but strength. Clutch of the Grave. He charms a ghost type within 30 feet of him, and it acts according to his wishes until released. No concentration, no save. He just steals a ghost. Pretty sure he took one of the Ghastlies. We probably saw that happen. He has Night Terror. You hex a creature within 60 feet. You cannot have or gain any bonus to hit, advantage or disadvantage on attack rolls, and you cannot crit. If the hexed creature dies while hexed, it rises as a Ghastly. This was meant to be used on literally anything that was bloodied. He was just going to start putting this on. If you died, he was just going to claim you. Grave Tender was here pretty much to just make sure that if you died, you stayed dead. And if you died, you would, you'd wander the world between worlds forever, shepherding lost souls. He can banish Kaya, but you have to persuade or intimidate him into doing it. Persuasion DC of 16, intimidation is 20 plus. If you fail one time, he will not intervene in the fight. And that's the thing that we got. And then CJ jumped into the Shadow Plate, which, I was not prepared for at all. We'll talk about the Lunarch in a bit. Ignore that stat block real quick. There we go. He jumped into Arlecchino because CJ is CJ, and every round that he's in there is like decades for him. He's in the deepest depths of despair. He's suffocating but never allowed to die. The land around him is barren, cratered, and devoid of meaningful light. The eyes are all around him. He can hear the sickening breath of a massive being, and literally anything is preferable beyond where he is. So this is the stuff that was kind of happening when the CJ jumped into Arlecchino, and I was like, why? What are you doing, man? But Jordan's gonna Jordan, and honestly, I'm proud of him. It was very brave. So that's the encounter. That's that. Arlecchino, when he died, obviously dropped the box, which absorbed everything that was within 20 feet. That had like less than a set amount of hit points. I forget what I said at the time, because those notes are not in these notes, and I don't know where those notes are. But that's the encounter. That's that. If they had convinced the Grave Tender to act, he could have just banished Kaya, which would have made Arlecchino much worse, which would have made it a lot easier. That being said, it would have been a lot easier to do that if CJ still had the Tombstone. Because if you still have the Tombstone, you're still working for the Grave Tender. He's incentivized to keep you alive. But the Grave Tender showed up because he knew someone was going to die. So that's why he was there. So rip to that idea. But that is the Manor encounter. Very unfair. Really just difficult for me to run because I tend to prefer encounters that are balanced towards the players. I want them to have fun. I want them to be challenged, yes, but I want them to have fun at the end of the day with the encounters. Stuff like this is really difficult for me to do, and we see a lot more of it as we get closer to the end of the game, where the sieges especially are extremely unfair and just designed for the players to lose. So that was a very difficult thing to run, but this was the first foray into that. I learned a lot from the Stonebreaker fight, so I gave everybody involved in this combat way more stuff than I would ever remember, because the Stonebreaker was just a massive stack of hit points and one creature. But that's the Arlecchino Manor fight. Hopefully you found this useful as a guide of like what not to do for your encounters. Nothing should ever have a stat block like this unless you're trying to kill your players, which at the time, yes, I was. So fully own that. This was meant to thin the herd of the Tots pretty substantially, and it didn't. So, there's that. Today we're talking about another completely busted, radically unfair encounter that I am so glad I did not have to run. We're going to talk about the Lunarch encounter that didn't happen, and I'm really thankful for it. Thank you to Operation Moon Boom for saving the Tots from this fate, because without all of the Tots assuming their demigod forms as shown in CJ's nightmare vision, this encounter was impossible. There was no way to win. So this would have just been the Tots seeing that they had no chance, because there's one specific thing down here called regeneration that when Helios was destroyed, the Tots had literally no way to do. So it would have just been a tragic march to the grave. So let's just jump right into it. We covered the Arlecchino Manor fight. This was that dialed up to 11. The only difference is the armor class is much more reasonable. 17 is still pretty high for my games, but at least it's not 23. So the Lunarch had an armor class of 17, an HP of 1,000, and stats just through the roof. I didn't even put the bonuses on there because at a certain point it doesn't matter. Yeah, basically it was not a fun fight. It had 120-foot fly speed, so you're never going to pin it down. It's just not going to happen. It resists electric, fire, and water. It's immune to grass, normal, dark, ghost, ground, lunar, fighting, and poison. It takes normal damage from ice, flying, psychic, bug, rock, dragon, steel, and fairy. Usually I don't put normal damage types on there, but for an encounter like this, I just wanted to make sure that everything was there. Thankfully, I didn't need this. I drummed it up as soon as I kind of figured out what the Lunarch fight would be, and before I gave CJ his vision. So I go, okay, I need them to assume these mantles, or this is gonna be impossible. And then one by one, they sort of didn't, and I was like, please help us, send help. And then, Joel came up with the idea to blow up and swap the moons, which was just, a lifesaver for me and everyone involved. But let's talk about it. This is the Lunarch's ability, is God Form. It's immune to any effect that would change its shape, alter its form, reduce its size or speed. So you can't slow it, you can't paralyze it, you can't daze it, it can't be stunned. You can't polymorph it for any reason. You can't, enlarge or reduce it or anything like that. When the Lunarch would be killed, it instead regains 500 hit points and all of its legendary resistances, which it has for a day. This was not the first time. This is every time, unless you kill it with solar damage, which was impossible by the time we would have gotten here. So, praise be for some ingenious thinking. So, 4 legendary resistances a day. These are the other abilities that it has, because one was not enough for the Lunarch. We hyped this thing up for a little over a year. We needed to make sure that it could survive for a while. If an effect would force the Lunarch to make a saving throw, on a successful save, the effect is reflected back at the caster using the original attack roll or saving throw DC. So if you try to confuse this thing, and it succeeds on the save, and let's be honest, it's going to, you instead have to succeed against it or suffer your own consequences. Not great. Thankfully, they all had the new tree badge by here, because you would have to make a DC 18 intelligence save if you can see this thing, or be frightened of it until the start of your next turn. And there's no immunity to this effect. You are rolling this every single turn forever, no matter what. Awful. A truly awful design. Again, I don't recommend you do this to your players. This is not fair. Players out there, if your DM puts this in front of you, you have messed up. Or it's been telegraphed for a long time, because this is not fair. This is the busted ability. At the start of the Lunarch's turn, it regains 100 hit points unless it has taken at least 30 points of solar damage since the end of its last turn. Now, Mortar could do solar damage by the end of the game. He was the only one that could do solar damage by the end of the game. He could not do 30 points of solar damage, even with max on a crit. Even with weakness. It was not possible. He could do a D10 plus 4 solar damage. So on a crit, max damage, that's 28. Rip in pieces. So not great at all. But let's talk actions. So this thing, it was just going to regain hit points indefinitely, and there's nothing you can do about it. Because even if you kill him, if it's not with that solar punch, it regains 500 hit points, all of its legendary resistances, and it just comes back. And this also plays into if it succeeds on a saving throw. So if for whatever reason it fails, no it didn't, and now you have to succeed. So I'm not a huge fan of legendary resistances in general, but if you want to do a one monster big bad, we talked about it in Arlecchino. If you need something to be a threat, you kind of need to do this. Because 5e characters can really just, by like level 10, they could probably kill this in like 3 rounds. There's some pretty busted combos out there. But let's talk about some attacks, and then we'll get into legendary actions. So, Moonblast. All creatures in a 300-foot cone must make a DC 17 wisdom save. Reading this out loud is just absurd. Or take 5d8 lunar damage, or half as much on a success. If this attack kills you, you're moon touched. Rip to you. You rise as a thrall to the Lunarch. That's pretty much a one-shot on the entire Tot side, because that's pretty bad. Most of them cannot reliably make a DC 17 Wisdom save without rolling exceptionally well across the board. And a lot of them were weak to lunar damage. That's not great. It's pretty rough. Next one, Lunar Wind. All creatures within 60 feet of you must make a DC 23 strength save. Again, super fair. Ripped directly from the Elder Dragon's stat block. So, you know, if anybody throws an Elder Dragon in front of you, I'm sorry. This is pretty similar to what you're going to be up against. Yeah, or suffer 4d6 lunar damage, be knocked prone, and then it can move up to half its speed. So if by some miracle you have this thing locked down and you've got it all surrounded, no you don't, it'll just fly away. Because you're just stuck. There's nothing you can do, because it's going to knock you prone, then you can't attack it, and then it's going to fly away. Lunar Lance is ripped from the Elder Dragon stat block as well, but for them it does like a fire bolts at a bunch of stuff. It's just some more AoE damage, but it just makes 4 projectile attacks. It just does 10 lunar damage to up to 4 creatures within 120 feet of it. There's no attack roll, there's no save. You just take 10 damage. It's just static damage as an attack, and it's a problem. So if you're spread out and by some miracle you don't have everything in a 300-foot cone, somehow, again, I don't know how these abilities came to pass. These are pretty much ripped one-to-one from the Elder Dragon stat blocks. I made a little bit of tweaks. I think I cut the damage dice down pretty substantially because I didn't need too much more than I gave it. And again, thankfully we didn't have to use this, because this would have just been miserable. If Phoebe had been the promised divinity, I'll give you guys a little extra sauce here. If Phoebe was the promised divinity, this effect, everybody would have always succeeded every time, and this would not have done any damage. So they would have had a little bit of protection from it. Obviously, if Bentley's flying around with demon wings and using the book to full effect, these abilities kind of start to shut down as well, and you can do solar damage. Yeah. And then obviously if CJ's doing ghost stuff, not super useful here, sorry buddy. And, you know, also not great because Lunar to Ghost for our setting was super effective. So it wouldn't have been very good. Would have been a very tough time. Legendary actions. I took these from, again, don't run this if you're a DM. Don't do this to your players. I took these abilities from Elder Brains and the Elder Brain Dragons. So don't do this, okay? We're going to get into legendary actions, but do not use this for your game. That's my disclaimer. These are not fair. These are not fun. Here we go. So, legendary actions. Break concentration. The Lunarch breaks the concentration of a creature within 300 feet and deals 1d10 psychic damage to any creature that is concentrating. So it breaks concentration on one thing, and if anything is concentrating, you take a d10 psychic damage, you immediately have to make a concentration check. So this was brutal because, you know, Sage is grassy terrain. Hey, you're not concentrating on that anymore. Take a d10 psychic damage. Everything around you that's concentrating on anything, d10 psychic damage, all of you. Make it happen. Cost 2 actions to make an attack. You make either a Moonblast attack or Lunar Lance and a Wing attack. So to refresh you, Moonblast is busted, and doing both of these on the same turn, also really just unfair. So thankfully that costs 2 actions, because, you know, that makes it better. So it's half your actions for the round. But again, if you're running high-level bad guys like this, you kind of have to make them a little bit busted if you want to be a threat. This was our endgame monster. It was meant to be really, really deadly, if not impossible, depending on how the players played their cards. Mind Rend is absolutely ruthless. Costs 3 actions. You tear at the psyche of all nearby creatures, roll 3d100, and affect a number of hit points equal to the total. If the total roll exceeds a creature's current hit points, that creature dies fully and their hit points are subtracted from the total. Repeat the process until the hit point pool is reduced to 0 or you don't have enough to kill another creature. If you drop to 0, you rise as moon-touched creatures under the Lunarch's control at initiative count 20. The roll always starts with the lowest HP creature in range and works up from there. Just really ridiculous, and I didn't put a range on this thing, which is, you know, kind of a huge oversight. Probably looking at the rest of my notes, it would have been 300 feet. This basically just says if I roll average on this, 150 hit points. That's 3 or 4 tot creatures every round are going to be killed, and then get up and fight for the Lunarch. This fight was going to be brutal, it was not going to be fun, and it was going to suck. And then Shatter Will. Here you go. Here's the other... God, just reading through these again, it's brutal. This costs all your legendary actions. You resurrect all dead creatures within 300 feet of you as moon-touched allies. They immediately attack the nearest creature, or if they belonged to a trainer, they go kill their trainer. This was not fun. The Shades have 10 hit points, and their armor class, stats, and attacks remain unchanged from their original form. So do not run this against your players. I do not recommend it. It will not be fun. Don't do this to your players. Please, I'm begging you. This is untested. This is not fun. It's not fair. This thing is a cobbled together version of ancient elder dragons, the elder brains, and like Orcus. Don't do this. Do not run this against your players. It's not fair. But if you do run it against your players, please let me know if they kill it. Very curious to do that. But also, if solar damage is not in your setting, sub it in for Radiant or something. Give them some way to win. If you did want to run this, I would get rid of the regeneration ability and make this only happen once. Treat it like the Elder Dragon. When you kill the Elder Dragon, it gets back up with half its hit points, gets all its legendary resistances and actions back, and then it gets like mythic actions, which then, sure, you could do these, you know, then gain these. Sure, that's probably doable. If I was going to run this in a genuine setting where I thought the players stood a chance, that's probably what I would do. So if you do want to use this for your game, which I don't recommend, take some of these down. This is completely unnecessary. I would put the HP down to like 500 or so and say it gets back up with 250. And if you're worried about survivability, maybe bump the armor class a little bit. That's my genuine recommendation for this. Otherwise, don't do this. Don't run this against your players. Players, if you see this thing, I'm sorry for putting this out in the world. Your DM has decided that your campaign is over, and I apologize. But if you kill it, you get forever bragging rights, and I'm very proud of you. So that's the Lunarch encounter. I'm very glad we didn't have to do that, because this would have just been a miserable time. Even if the Tots had ascended to their final forms and taken all their mantles and had all of their abilities, I don't think this was doable. So, yeah. Hopefully you learned what not to do from this. This is probably like 20th level D&D, and even then I think most involved characters would not survive. So, yeah, don't do this. Again, don't do this. If your players die to this monster and they come to me and they say, how could you? I'm going to point them to this part in the video where I said, hey, please don't run this against your players. This fight is not fair. Don't do this. Just don't do it. A DC 23 save, that's so unfair. That's absolutely correct. Like, do not listen to my encounter design for endgame bosses. This is insane. Don't do this. But now that I've gotten those disclaimers out of the way, thank you all for watching. Thank you so much for all of your questions during the Pearly Gates Q&A live stream and before. I hope you all enjoyed the Tots game as it played out. Stay tuned in the future. We are going to continue these lab series, but we are going to do a bit of a rebrand as we move into Game 2 stuff. So the next few lab-style videos, they may be up already. I'm not entirely sure at the time of recording for these. But you'll see Devin, Joel, and myself breaking down some of the mechanics that you're going to see in Game 2. How they work, how the new system works, and just some of the stuff that you'll be seeing moving forward. So future lab videos will be done at the studio and will feature more than just me as a little PNG image sitting in my office talking to you about a game that's all over and done. But hopefully you all enjoyed the Pearly Gates. I hope we covered all of everyone's questions. I will endeavor to keep answering them in the YouTube comments and on Discord as well. But this does conclude the Pearly Gates Q&A stuff at the time of recording. So thank you all so much for all of your questions. It's been a blast running this game and sharing it with all of you. But it's time to look towards Game 2. So we'll see you in the Game 2 System Mechanics series. I don't know which one's going to come up first, so I'm not even going to I don't even have a teaser for you, I apologize, but stay tuned if they haven't already started, and we'll see you there. But thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.